The long line in the hall was crowded, filled with voices, footsteps, and tired sighs. But the alien widow mother stood quietly near the corner, holding her little daughter's hand, her other child resting weakly on her shoulder. She looked thin. Her clothes were worn, and her eyes showed long nights of fear and hunger. Every morning she came here to the colony job center, and every morning she hoped someone would call her name. The line stretched endlessly, humans and aliens waiting together. But whenever her turn came, the answer was the same. No positions left. Try somewhere else. We don't need more mouths to feed. Some officers didn't even look at her papers. They only glanced at her tired face and the children hiding behind her dress. The whispers around her cut deep. She's a widow. Her kind is a burden. Another voice laughed. Look at her. She can't even carry heavy tools. No human will ever hire her. Her daughter squeezed her hand. Mama, can we eat tonight? The widow smiled softly, but inside her chest, the answer burned. She didn't know. She had sold most of her belongings already. All she had left were her children, her courage, and a small voice that refused to give up. Hours passed. The line moved slowly, but every step felt heavier than the last. She watched people leaving with work papers, their faces filled with relief. When her turn finally came, the clerk didn't even pretend to be polite. We don't take your kind. Next, he pushed her form back without reading it. Her heart broke a little more, but she bowed her head and left the desk. Her children followed silently, their small steps echoing on the cold floor. She carried their hope on her shoulders. But that hope was fading. Outside the job center, the night lights of the colony flickered. She looked at the sky dome above, where stars shone faintly through the glass. She whispered, "Please, I just need a job, please?" But no one answered. The crowd kept walking, busy with their own lives. On the street corner, two merchants laughed as they saw her. That alien widow again, begging for work every day. Pathetic. One of them threw a small stone at her feet, making her children flinch. She pulled them close and kept walking, swallowing the shame. Refusing to let them see her tears, she had one last coin in her pocket. Not enough for proper food, maybe just a piece of bread. She thought about saving it for tomorrow, but her children's faces told her she could not wait as she moved through the market. She didn't notice a pair of human eyes following her from across the street. A man leaned against a post, his arms crossed, watching the way she carried her children and endured the insults. He didn't move, not yet, but something in his expression was different, curious, almost thoughtful. The widow stopped at a small food stall, handed over the coin, and received half a loaf of hard bread. She broke it into 3 pieces and gave it to her children, taking nothing for herself. Hunger twisted in her stomach, but her eyes softened as she saw them eat quickly. Smiling for a moment, then her little boy asked, "Mama, will you eat later?" She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Yes, later." But deep down she knew there was no later, only emptiness waiting. The human man watching clenched his jaw. He had seen enough. Something stirred inside him, a question he could not push away. Why is no one helping her? The widow walked into the shadows of the street, still searching, still whispering to herself. She didn't know that this night would change everything. That one human's decision would rewrite her life. Asterisk denied again. The next morning came with no warmth. The colony lights flickered weakly as the alien widow mother stepped out with her children. Their faces were pale, their eyes still heavy from hunger. She wrapped her thin scarf tighter around her shoulders and whispered to them, "Today, maybe someone will say yes." Her little daughter nodded bravely, though her stomach rumbled. Her son tried to smile, but his steps were slow. The widow carried their hope like a fragile glass, one careless push, and it would break. She went to the laundry shop first. The smell of detergent drifted out as workers rushed in and out with baskets. She bowed low before the owner, a human woman with sharp eyes. "Please, I can wash, I can fold. Hire me, I'll take any pay." The woman's face turned cold. "We don't need outsiders. My workers are already enough. Leave," she slammed the door, leaving the widow trembling in the dust. She tried the mechanic's garage next. Sparks flew as men worked on hover engines. She raised her voice over the noise. "Please, I'll clean the tools, I'll sweep the floor. My children need food." A mechanic laughed, waving her away. "You think we'll let alien hands touch human machines? Go beg somewhere else." Another added cruelly, "Take your brats with you before they steal." The widow lowered her head, clutching her children's hands. She did not answer back. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. Survival was all she had. As the day dragged on, every door closed. At the baker's, the tailor's, even the recycling plant, everywhere she went, rejection waited. Some gave polite excuses, most gave insults, and a few laughed in her face. Her papers crumpled in her hand, damp with sweat and tears. Her children grew weaker, their steps slower. Her son whispered, "Mama, I can work too. Maybe they will take me." Her heart broke at his words. She hugged him close. "No, you are too small. I will find a way." By evening, her voice had grown hoarse from asking, pleading, begging. The market lights turned dim as the colony settled into night. Families walked home with bags of food, their children laughing. The widow's children stared silently, their hunger sharpening like knives inside them. At the corner of the market, she sank onto a broken crate. She pulled her children close and stroked their hair. She tried to smile, but her lips shook. The cold air bit at her skin, and her chest felt heavy. "Please, I just need a job." She whispered again, but this time her voice was only a breath. Lost in the crowd, she didn't know that the same human man from last night was still watching. He leaned against the shadow of a stall, arms folded, eyes steady. He had followed her path, seen every door slam, heard every cruel word. Most humans would have looked away, telling themselves it was not their problem. But something about her silence, her strength, the way she shielded her children stirred something deep inside him as the widow stood again. Ready to walk home with nothing but despair, he stepped a little closer. His eyes narrowed with a thought he had not spoken yet. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would not stay silent. Tomorrow, he would speak to her. But for now, the widow walked into the darkness, unaware that her fate was already beginning to change. Asterisk. The last coin the next morning was colder. The widow woke before the lights of the colony had brightened. Her children still slept, curled against her thin blanket. She sat quietly, holding her small purse in her lap. She opened it and stared. Inside was one coin, just one. The last of her savings, the last piece of her old life. She turned it over in her hand. It was worn and dull, but to her it felt heavy, like the weight of her children's hunger, the weight of her failure. She remembered when her husband gave her coins every week, when the house had warmth, when food was enough. But those days had vanished with him. Now there was only this one coin and the eyes of her children waiting for hope. Her daughter woke first. She rubbed her eyes and whispered, "Mama, can we eat today?" The widow nodded quickly, hiding the truth in her smile. "Yes, my child. We will eat." She kissed her forehead and prayed her words would not turn into lies. Later that day, she carried her children into the busy market. The smell of roasted meat and baked bread drifted through the air, making their stomachs twist with pain. She clutched the coin tightly, as if it might slip away, as if fate might steal it before she could use it. At a food stall, she offered the coin to the vendor. "Please, How much can I get for this?" The vendor glanced at the coin and sneered. "1 coin? You can have half a loaf, nothing more." She bowed her head. "Please, I have 2 children." "Half a loaf," the vendor repeated coldly. "Take it or leave it." Her children stared at the bread, their eyes wide, their little hands reaching. She took it, breaking it into 3 pieces. She gave 1 to her son, 1 to her daughter, and kept the smallest for herself. They ate quickly, crumbs falling from their lips, joy lighting their faces for a brief moment. She chewed slowly on her piece, pretending it was enough, even as hunger gnawed at her stomach. But even with food in their mouths, her heart trembled. What about tomorrow? What about the day after? As the market grew louder, a group of young men spotted her sitting on the edge of the square. They laughed cruelly. "There she is again, the widow who begs for jobs." One tossed a peel of fruit at her feet. "Why don't you just give up?" Her son stood quickly, trying to defend her. "Leave my mama alone," he cried. The men only laughed harder. The widow pulled him back, pressing his head against her chest, whispering, "No, my child, don't fight." We walk away. With the last coin gone and no chance of work, she felt the weight of despair pressing harder than ever. Every step she took felt like walking into darkness, but she didn't notice the man watching her again. The same human who had followed her the past 2 days. His jaw tightened as he saw her give away her share of bread, as he saw her shield her son from mockery. He had seen enough to know this was not just survival, this was strength. Quiet and unbroken. He thought to himself, tomorrow she will not be alone. The widow walked home that night with empty hands, her children leaning on her arms. The stars above the colony dome glittered faintly, but for her, the sky felt cold. She whispered once more, almost too softly to hear, "Please, just a job." She didn't know her whispered prayer had already reached the ears of one man, who would soon change everything. The stranger watches the colony never truly slept. Even in the deep hours of night, lights hummed and machines whispered in the background. The widow lay awake on her thin blanket, her children breathing softly beside her. Hunger no longer kept her awake. Fear did. Fear of tomorrow. Fear of nothing changing. Fear of her children fading before her eyes. She did not know that only a few streets away, a human man sat outside his workshop, watching the empty road. His name was Daniel. His hands were rough from years of repairing machines, and his heart was heavier than he admitted. He had lost people too, though no one asked about his grief anymore. For 3 nights, Daniel had watched the alien widow from a distance. He told himself he was only curious, but each day he saw the same thing, her courage in rejection, her silence in humiliation, her strength in feeding her children before herself. Most people passed her by, but he could not. Something in her quiet endurance stirred a memory of his own mother, who had once stood in long lines after the war, clutching his hand just the same way. The next morning, the widow walked again through the busy streets. Her daughter clung to her dress, her son limped slightly, his energy fading. She stopped at another shop, bowing low. "Please, I will do anything. Clean floors, wash dishes. Just give me a chance." The shopkeeper sneered. "We don't want alien widows here. You bring bad luck." The widow lowered her eyes, whispered thanks, and turned away. Daniel saw it all from across the street. He felt his fists clench. He wanted to step forward right then, but something held him back. He knew the colony, knew the cruel whispers. If he helped her openly, he would also become a target. Still, he could not ignore her suffering much longer. Later in the market, the widow tried to sell the small scarf she wore, her last piece of value. Merchants shook their heads or offered insulting prices. One even laughed. "This rag isn't worth a crumb of bread." She pulled it back quickly, her face burning. With shame, Daniel stood in the shadow of a stall, his arms crossed, his heart restless. He noticed the way her children huddled close, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity even when mocked. Many in the colony said aliens were weak, lazy, or dangerous. But what he saw was the opposite: a mother who gave everything to her children, even when she had nothing left. That night, Daniel walked home with a heavy mind. His workshop was small, but it always needed cleaning. The machines needed tending. There was always work, but he had never trusted anyone enough to hire. Now he thought of the widow. Could she? Would she? The next morning, when the widow appeared again in the job center line, Daniel was there too, leaning against the wall, watching her with sharp eyes. She did not see him at first. She was too focused on keeping her children calm, too busy holding her papers that no one would read when her turn came. The officer pushed her aside as usual. No openings, don't waste our time. Her children's shoulders dropped, and she led them out silently. For the first time, Daniel moved. He followed her down the street. His boots echoed on the stone path. She noticed the sound, turned, and her eyes met his. For a moment, fear flickered across her face. Humans who followed her usually brought trouble. But Daniel did not insult her. He only spoke 5 words. Do you still need work? The widow froze, her children pressing close to her side. She stared at him, not sure if it was a cruel trick or a real offer. Her heart raced. Could this be the chance she had prayed for? Daniel's voice was calm, steady. If you want it, come tomorrow morning. My workshop. We'll see if you can handle it. He didn't wait for her reply. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her trembling in the street. For the first time in weeks, the widow felt something new stirring in her chest. Not fear, not despair, the smallest spark of hope. The job offer. The widow hardly slept that night. Daniel's words kept circling in her mind. If you want it, come tomorrow morning. She wondered if it had been real or just another cruel joke. So many times, people had tricked her, humiliated her, laughed at her tears. She could not risk more pain, but at the same time, she could not ignore the chance. Before dawn, she dressed her children in the cleanest clothes she had left. They ate nothing. There was nothing to eat, but she told them, today may be different. Her daughter asked carefully, Mama, is someone giving you work? The widow smiled faintly. Maybe, we will see. The workshop was at the edge of the colony, a small building with faded paint and the smell of oil drifting out. The widow stood before its door, her children hiding behind her dress. Her hands shook as she lifted them to knock. The door opened before she touched it. Daniel stood there, wiping grease from his hands. He looked at her for a long moment. She lowered her eyes, waiting for laughter, waiting for rejection. Instead, he stepped aside. Come in. The workshop was filled with old machines, gears, stacked on shelves, and broken parts scattered on tables. It was messy, loud, alive with the hum of half-finished work. Daniel handed her a cloth. Start by cleaning that table. If you do well, we'll talk more. The widow nodded quickly, almost too quickly, and rushed to obey. She cleaned with careful hands, moving each tool as if it were precious. Her children sat quietly in the corner, watching her with wide eyes. Hours passed. Dust turned into shine. Grease stains faded under her effort, and the air slowly grew clear. Daniel worked nearby, glancing at her from time to time. He noticed the way she never complained, the way she never stopped to rest, the way she kept her children close yet. Out of trouble by noon, she was sweating, her back aching, but she did not slow down. She feared that if she stopped even for a moment, the chance would disappear. Finally, Daniel spoke. That's enough for today. The widow turned quickly, afraid she had done something wrong. But instead of anger, Daniel reached into his pocket and placed a few coins on the table. Payment for your work." Her eyes widened. She shook her head. "No, please. I only cleaned. That is too much." "It's fair," Daniel said firmly. "You worked hard. You earned it." Her hands trembled as she picked up the coins. For the first time in weeks, she had real money enough for food, maybe even a blanket. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to look weak. She whispered, "Thank you." Daniel looked at her children. "They need food." His voice was rough, but not unkind. "Buy them something warm today." The widow nodded quickly. Her children's faces glowed with sudden hope, though they stayed silent, sensing the seriousness of the moment. As she turned to leave, Daniel called after her. "Come back tomorrow. There's more work." She froze, her breath catching. It wasn't just one day. It wasn't just a coin. It was the beginning of something she had begged the stars for, a chance. A future. She bowed deeply, clutching her children's hands. "I will be here." Outside, the colony streets felt different. The insults, the cold, the hunger, none of it could crush the small flame of hope burning inside her now. Her children skipped beside her, whispering, "Mama, we can eat tonight." For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would not be filled with rejection. Maybe tomorrow she would stand not as a beggar, but as someone with worth. A harsh beginning. The widow returned the next morning, her children walking beside her with cautious smiles. The workshop looked the same: dusty shelves, broken machines, the smell of oil, but to her it felt like a doorway to survival. She whispered to herself, "Don't fail, not today." Daniel was already at work, hammering a stubborn gear into place. He looked up as she entered and gave a short nod. "You're on time. Good." His voice was rough, without warmth, but it wasn't cruel. He pointed toward a stack of rusty parts. "Sort these by size. Then clean the floor, tea, and keep the children out of the way." The widow nodded quickly. Yes. She guided her children to sit quietly in the corner and began working. The pile was heavy, the parts covered in grease and dust. Her hands soon turned black. Her arms ached, but she did not stop. Hours passed. Daniel barely spoke, only giving short instructions now and then. He watched carefully, testing her patience, her focus. She didn't complain, not even when her fingers bled from sharp edges. She simply tore a piece of her scarf and wrapped it around the cut, then kept working. By midday, sweat rolled down her face. Her children grew restless, but she hushed them softly. "Just a little longer. Mama is working." They obeyed, their eyes filled with silent pride. When the floor was finally clean, she looked at Daniel, waiting. He studied her for a long moment. "You work harder than most men I've hired before," he admitted. "But this isn't charity. You keep up, or you're out. Understand?" She bowed her head. "I understand." Still, not everyone in the colony approved. As she stepped outside to fetch water, two women from a nearby shop whispered loudly, "Look at her, pretending to work with humans. Doesn't she know her place?" Another sneered, "He must pity her. It won't last." The widow heard every word, but she kept walking. Her pride was not for herself, it was for her children. That evening, when Daniel handed her a few more coins, she hesitated. "It's too much," she said softly. "It's fair," he replied, his tone firm. "You worked. You earned it." She accepted the coins with trembling fingers. On the way home, she bought bread, soup, and even a small piece of fruit for her children. Their faces lit up as if the world had changed. For the first time in months, their stomachs were full. But the work was not easy. The next day, Daniel asked her to lift heavy crates. Her arms shook under the weight, her back bent, but she carried them one by one. He asked her to scrub stubborn oil stains from the floor until her knuckles burned. She did it all without complaint. Daniel noticed. He said nothing, but his eyes softened when he saw the determination in her face. Still, he kept his distance. He wasn't ready to show kindness too openly. On the third day, when she arrived, a group of workers from another shop stood outside the workshop. One called out, "So it's true the human hires a widow alien. What a joke." Another spat. "On the ground, you'll ruin his business." The widow's heart pounded. For a moment, she thought Daniel might send her away to avoid trouble, but he stepped out, his arms crossed. His voice cut through the laughter. "She works harder than any of you. If you don't like it, stay out of my sight." The men grumbled and left. The widow stood frozen, stunned by his defense. Daniel only turned to her and said, "Get inside. Work won't finish itself." That night, as she walked home, her children skipping happily beside her, the widow finally allowed herself to breathe. The beginning had been harsh, filled with doubt, pain, and whispers, but it was a beginning. For the first time, she felt she was not walking alone. Rumors spread by the end of the week. The widow had settled into her new rhythm. Every morning, she rose before dawn, dressed her children, and walked quietly to Daniel's workshop. She cleaned, sorted, carried, and worked until her body ached. At night, she returned home with food in her hands and hope in her heart. For her, it felt like a fragile miracle, but not everyone saw it that way. Rumors began to crawl through the colony like poison. In the markets, people whispered as she passed, "Did you hear? The human pays her too much." Another voice sneered, "He must be desperate, or maybe he wants something else from her." Others shook their heads, muttering, "If aliens start working in our shops, what will happen to humans? She'll ruin everything." The widow heard every word. Each insult landed like a stone against her chest, but she kept walking, holding her children's hands tighter. She told herself she could endure anything as long as they ate at night. Even Daniel noticed the whispers. Customers at his workshop hesitated when they saw her. Some refused to step inside, muttering that the place had been tainted. One man even shouted, "You'll regret hiring her, Daniel. She'll bring trouble." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Outwardly, he worked as usual, repairing machines and giving orders. Inwardly, he was weighing a choice. He knew the colony could turn cruel very quickly. The widow, too, felt the pressure. One afternoon, as she scrubbed the floor, she found a crude message scratched onto the workshop door. "Alien trash." She froze, her hands trembling as her children read the word aloud. Quickly, she wiped it clean before Daniel saw, hiding her tears behind a forced smile. But Daniel had seen. He stood behind her silently, his eyes burning. He didn't say anything, but that night he reinforced the locks on his door and left, a tool near his bed for defense. The next morning, the tension grew worse. A group of men stood outside the workshop, whispering loudly, just loud enough for the widow to hear. She never last. She run crying soon. Another spat. On the ground, let her. Aliens don't belong here. Her children clung to her skirt, frightened. For the first time, doubt flickered inside her. Would Daniel give in to the pressure and send her away? She had nothing else to fall back on. Inside, Daniel worked silently, but his gaze kept drifting toward her. He saw her shoulders stiff, her hands trembling slightly as she carried tools. He knew the fear in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. That evening, after the men left, the widow stood quietly at the workshop door, clutching her children's hands. Her voice was small when she spoke. "If my being here causes you trouble, I will leave." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. His voice was steady when he finally answered. "Trouble comes whether we ask for it or not." "You're not." Leaving, her eyes widened. For the first time, he had spoken with real weight, not just rough commands. There was no pity in his tone, no doubt, only certainty. But outside, the whispers did not fade. The colony was restless. The more she worked, the louder the rumors grew. Some said she was cursed. Others claimed she was stealing from Daniel. A few even hinted at violence if she stayed too long. The widow lay awake that night, her children asleep beside her. She stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She was grateful for the human's kindness, but she feared what was coming. For the first time, she wondered, how far would the colony go to break her? And in the shadows of the marketplace, men who despised her were already planning their answer. Asterisk the attack, the days grew darker for the widow. The more she worked at Daniel's shop, the harsher the whispers became. Neighbors stopped speaking to her. Shopkeepers turned their backs, and even children in the street pointed and laughed at hers. But she endured it all. Each evening, she returned home with bread, soup, and sometimes even fruit. Her children's smiles made the cruelty bearable. Daniel noticed the changes too. Fewer customers came to his workshop. Some who did arrive refused to step inside when they saw the widow sweeping the floor or polishing tools. "You'll regret this, Daniel," one man warned. "Aliens bring nothing but ruin." Daniel's only reply was a grunt, but inside he was boiling. He hated the injustice, yet he knew how fast a crowd's hatred could turn to violence. That night, after the shop closed, the widow lingered, helping him lock the doors. Her children curled up on a bench, tired from waiting. Daniel watched her. Hands still raw from scrubbing, still steady despite the insults, and said, "Go home early tomorrow. It's safer." She shook her head. "If I stop, they win." "I can't stop." Daniel didn't argue. He only tightened the lock again and handed her a small lantern. "At least take this. The streets are not safe." But danger did not wait on the streets. 3 nights later, long after the lights of the colony dimmed, shadows moved outside the workshop. The widow had stayed late, cleaning the shelves while Daniel repaired a stubborn engine. Her children slept. In the corner, their soft breaths filling the quiet space. Then came the sound, a crash of glass, the thud of boots, and angry voices. The door burst open. A group of men stormed inside, their faces hidden with cloth, their hands gripping pipes and sticks. "We warned you, Daniel," one shouted. "Throw her out, or we burn this place down." The widow froze, her heart pounding. She pulled her children close, shielding them with her body. Daniel stepped forward, his hammer still in his hand. His voice was sharp, steady. "You'll leave now." But the men only laughed. One kicked over a crate, spilling gears across the floor. Another raised his pipe. "Then we'll destroy the place with her inside." The widow's hands shook, but she did not run. She guided her children behind a workbench, then turned back. She picked up a heavy wrench, her thin arms trembling under its weight. For the first time, her fear turned into fire. "You will not touch my children," she cried, her voice breaking through the chaos. The men paused, surprised. Daniel used the moment. He swung his hammer, striking the leader's pipe with a loud crack. The workshop filled with a clash of metal and shouts. The widow grabbed another tool and swung clumsily at a man who lunged toward her children. The blow was weak, but it startled him long enough for Daniel to knock him back. The fight was messy, violent. Shelves toppled, sparks flew from broken wires, and the air filled with dust and rage. But together, human and alien, they stood there. Ground. Finally, bruised and bleeding, the attackers stumbled back. One spat on the floor. "This isn't over. She'll bring your ruin." Then they fled into the night. The workshop was left in shambles. Tools scattered, shelves broken, the air heavy with smoke. The widow collapsed to her knees, her children rushing to her side. Her chest heaved, but her eyes were steady. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. She was trembling, bleeding from a cut on her arm. But she hadn't run. She had fought, not for herself, but for the children, for the workshop, for survival. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift inside him. This was no burden, no weakness. This was strength, rare and unyielding. He knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face them alone anymore. The widow stared at him, shocked. For so long she had been cast aside, unwanted, unseen. But tonight, under the flickering lights of the broken workshop, she realized someone had finally chosen to stand with her. Asterisk. The Human's Choice morning came, but the workshop still smelled of smoke and broken wires. The shelves were cracked, tools scattered across the floor, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. The widow stood quietly with her children, trying to sweep the mess. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to keep working. She feared what might come next. Would Daniel blame her? Would he decide she was not worth the danger? Daniel arrived not long after. His face was bruised, one arm wrapped in cloth, but his eyes were sharp. He watched her for a long moment. She waited for the words she dreaded. "Leave, you bring too much trouble." Instead, he said, "You came back." The widow lowered her eyes. "This is your place. I should help repair it. But if my presence ruins your life, I will go." Daniel walked past her, picked up a fallen shelf, and set it against the wall. His voice was steady, almost calm. "They want me to send you away. That was the point of the attack." She nodded slowly, her heart sinking. "Then, you should." For a long silence, Daniel said nothing. He stood by the broken door, looking out at the colony street where people were already whispering and pointing. Then he turned back, his jaw firm. "No," he said. "I won't." The widow blinked, stunned. "But they hate me. They hate that I work here." "They'll hate no matter what," Daniel replied. "I've seen men break under less pressure, but I won't. You work harder than anyone I've known. You protect your children, and you even protected this shop. You've earned your place here." The widow's breath caught. She had begged for scraps, pleaded for work, endured humiliation, and now, for the first time, someone declared she belonged. Outside, the whispers grew louder. A small crowd gathered, pointing at the broken door. One man shouted, "Throw her out, Daniel. You'll destroy your business." Another sneered, "She's nothing but alien trash. Don't side with her." Daniel stepped into the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking their view of the widow and her children. His voice cut through the noise like steel. "She's part of my team now," he declared. "She stays." The crowd murmured angrily. Some cursed, some spat on the ground. But Daniel did not move. His hammer was still in his hand, his stance unshaken. The widow watched from behind him, her heart racing. The men outside finally backed away, their threats lingering in the air. "You'll regret this," one warned. "The whole colony will turn against you." When they were gone, silence filled the workshop. The widow pressed her children close, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered, "Why? Why would you risk yourself for me?" Daniel turned, meeting her eyes. "Because I've seen enough to know what's right, and I won't stand by while everyone else does nothing." For a moment, the widow could not speak. Her life had been rejection after rejection, door after door slammed shut. But here, one human had opened his door wide, even when the world told him not to. Her children clung to her arms, smiling through their fear. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe the universe still held kindness. Daniel bent to pick up the broken pieces of the shop. "It won't be easy. They'll keep talking. maybe worse. But if you're ready to stand with me, we'll face it together." The widow wiped her tears and nodded firmly. "I will not leave. I will work. I will fight if I must. I will not run anymore." Daniel gave a small, rare smile. "Good. Then let's rebuild." The sound of sweeping and hammering filled the shop again. But this time, it wasn't just work, it was defiance. A human and an alien standing against the weight of an entire colony. And though the danger was not gone, something stronger now bound them together. Trust. A new dawn, the colony woke with. Whispers again. Word of Daniel's decision spread faster than fire. Some called him foolish, others said he had lost his mind. But none could deny the truth. He had stood in front of the crowd and chosen the alien widow. The widow felt the weight of every stare as she walked to the workshop the next morning. People muttered, pointed, even laughed. But this time, she did not bow her head. Her children walked beside her proudly, holding her hands. They were no longer just beggars clinging to survival. They were a family walking toward hope. When she entered the workshop, Daniel was already working. His arm was still bandaged, but his hammer struck steady. He glanced at her and gave a small nod. "You came." Her voice was firm. "I said I would." The workshop was still scarred from the attack. Shelves broken, windows cracked, dust clinging to every corner. Together, they set to work. She cleaned the glass, her children carried small tools, and Daniel repaired the machines. Bit by bit, the workshop began to breathe again. At noon, Daniel placed food on the table: bread, soup, and fruit. He pushed it toward her children first. "Eat, you'll need strength." The widow hesitated, unused to such open kindness. But when she saw her children's smiles, her heart swelled. Outside, a few curious faces peeked through the broken window. Instead of weakness, they saw something else. A workshop alive again. A family working together, laughter rising above the dust. Some whispered angrily, but others paused, uncertain. In the days that followed, the change grew clearer. Customers returned, slowly at first, then in greater numbers. They came not because they liked the widow, but because Daniel's repairs were the best. And when they saw her working silently beside him, sorting parts, carrying crates, cleaning with tireless hands, some even softened. The rumors didn't disappear, but they lost their power. People could no longer deny what they saw with their own eyes. A widow who worked harder than anyone, and a human who stood unshaken at her side. One evening, as the workshop lights dimmed, Daniel leaned against the doorframe and watched the widow tuck her children into a blanket on the bench. Their small faces glowed with contentment, their bellies full, their laughter soft. "You've changed this place," Daniel said quietly. The widow looked at him, surprised. "No. You gave me the chance." He shook his head. "I gave you work. You gave it life." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but they were not the tears of despair she once carried. These were different tears of relief, of dignity restored the next morning. As dawn light filtered through the colony dome, the widow stepped outside with her children. For the first time in months, she did not whisper please, just a job. She no longer needed to beg. She had work, respect, and the strength of someone who had endured everything and survived. Her children laughed as they skipped ahead, their voices carrying hope into the quiet streets. And behind them, Daniel locked the workshop door, his steps steady as he joined them. The colony might still whisper, but whispers could not erase what had been built. One human's choice had changed the fate of a widow, her children, and perhaps, slowly, the way others saw her kind, as the widow lifted her face to the faint stars above the dome. She whispered a new prayer, not for survival, but for tomorrow. It was, at last, a new dawn.